So I'm one of those guys. I liked math in school. My favorite, bye ladies. Not even a hug. My favorite math class in college was probability and statistics because it was all about figuring out the odds. What are the odds that you could win Powerball, lottery? 1 in 292 million. Not very good odds, in case you're wondering. What are the odds that over the course of your lifetime you will be struck by lightning? They're better than winning the lottery. 1 in 1.2 million. And did you know there's a world record for being struck by lightning? 7 times. How'd you know that? Here, you do the rest of this part, will you? You know what his name was? Roy Sullivan. Roy Sullivan was struck by lightning 7 times. This is what I learned from that. One of those times he was struck when he was hanging clothes outside on the clothesline with his wife. Moral of the story is don't hang clothes out on the clothesline, use the dryer. His wife also got struck. Over the course of 7 times surviving and living to tell it, we find out that well, Roy didn't have much hair, and he certainly had fewer close friends. So let's talk baseball. It's spring, a lot of toddlers out playing in Little League. What are the odds that you could make it into the major leagues? 1 in 6,600. But if you do make it and you happen to get to pitch for the Cardinals, the odds increase dramatically that you give up a home run to some guy in a Brewers uniform. What's the deal with all the what are the odds questions? That's easier to answer than serving up a meatball pitch to Mr. Christian Yelich. Not a lot of Brewer Cardinal fans here. Okay. Here's the story. What are the odds that someone who was brutally tortured and murdered through crucifixion by the Roman Empire would come back to life? The odds are astronomical and for many people unbelievable. But here's the catch. It really happened. Christ is risen. You had help. You were here at 9:30. We're going to try that again. The odds are astronomical, but it really did occur. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Hallelujah. All right, so that's one of my tasks that I've accomplished today. I have 2 other tasks. My goal is to do this, to convince you to not only celebrate that truth on this Easter day, but to live it each and every day of your life. And I'm going to accomplish this task in under 12 minutes. You believe that? Right, there's clapping, there's cheer. Yeah, it's great. I don't know what you put my odds at accomplishing this, but I bet they are better than this church being this full next Sunday. Yeah, it's true. It's true. But I digress. Back to my goals. Today we conclude a worship series on the book of Exodus. We've seen this slide for the last 6 weeks, Let My People Go. We've been talking about how God directed the children of Israel through Moses to escape from the land of captivity where they were brutally treated and overworked, harshly so. This is what Pharaoh did to them. The Egyptians put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor and work them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter. And then it got to the point where it was so bad that he said, you know what? You're going to keep making all of these bricks and these buildings, but now you are going to go and collect all the supplies you need. But you're still going to have to make the same number of bricks. And this continues, and it continues, and it continues. Finally, 400 years later, they get to escape, and they're racing off through the desert, headed towards the Red Sea. They look over their shoulders, and lo and behold, that mighty Egyptian army is chasing them. and now they're trapped. What are the odds that slaves who have no chariots, nor hosts, no cavalry, no trained soldiers are going to defeat the greatest army known to mankind? But then the water splits. They walk over on dry ground, and our Old Testament reading tells us how they celebrated with the song of Moses, including these words, "The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation." This song, sung thousands of years ago, is a precursor to the greatest Easter songs that we sing, inspired by the greatest biblical message of against all odds. Of course, we're talking about Jesus, the one who was born of the Virgin, who became married to the carpenter, who came from no place. The church leaders and the government leaders conspired against him. His brothers thought he was nuts. His own disciples sold him for 30 pieces of silver. And then once he was arrested, they stripped him, beat him. They beat him into a bloody pulp, and then they spiked him to a tree for 6 hours. A couple of days later, when all of those who had loved him and followed him and mourned his death went to that tomb to continue their mourning, and the angel appears and says, "He's not here. He has risen just as he said. Against all odds, Jesus lives." But as noted, my goal for you today is not only to profess that truth, maybe even say Christ is risen, he is risen indeed a few more times, but to get you to live that, so that tomorrow morning when you wake up, you'll be living the Easter joy. But how do you do that? How am I going to do that? First of all, we have to recognize the truth of our lives. For many of us, the truth of that is we came from families that just didn't work. Sometimes I run into people and they're a little bit zombie-like because when they were kids, something inside of them broke. And now that they're a third of the way through their life, maybe halfway through their life, they're thinking to themselves, what are the odds that what's broken is going to become fixed? I'm talking about the 1 in 3 people who grew up in divorced families, the 1 in 4 women who were sexually abused, the 1 in 7 who grew up with an alcoholic parent. I'm talking about families who children grew up with absentee dads, controlling moms, screaming parents, abusive siblings. I'm talking about all of you who feel that the odds of having that corrected, having that fixed, they're all against you, and always have been, and always will be. Or maybe that's not you at all. Instead, you've experienced a loss, a great loss. As a child, your parent died. Or maybe your spouse has died, or child. For others, it means your dream has died. And I know for some, their desire and hope for living has died. I'm talking to all of you who feel that the odds are completely against you. Or maybe you're one of those who is crippled with some sort of destructive habit. You haven't figured it out yet. We all have habits. We all have bad habits. Maybe it's one of the big ones: gambling, drugs, alcohol, pornography. For those struggling with addiction, what are the odds of recovering? I bet you feel as they're insurmountable. Or maybe it's something as simple and yet so sad and powerful as the recent diagnosis. Stage 4 cancer. What are my odds? All the odds were against a man by the name of Lee Capps. Lee had a good buddy who had a private pilot's license, and this buddy invited him up for a flight one day, and so Lee went, and they were up at cruising around, looking down on the earth, and his buddy had a medical emergency. Suffered a heart attack and died. Imagine how you would feel. Imagine how Lee felt. He grabbed the radio and he cried for help. An air traffic controller heard Lee's cry and said, "Hey, Lee, this is your lucky day. I am not only an air traffic controller, I'm also a flight instructor. How would you like a lesson today?" Well, since I'm really otherwise not preoccupied, I'll take the lesson. Lee Capps came in like a drunk duck. He was all over the place. He landed extremely hard, but get this. Against all odds, he walked away with his life. Now, I know stuff is going on in your life. I know for many of you, a lot of stuff is going on in your life. You're circling the runway and trying to land, and your greatest fear is that you're just going to crash and burn. Let me remind you of two honest-to-God facts. The children of Israel did escape slavery and captivity. They did. And against all odds, Jesus Christ is risen today. And so today we profess Easter. And many of us profess it with every ounce of our being that Jesus is alive. I mentioned to one of the persons who's been to all four services so far and has been singing at all four services, after the first service, I was singing with such gusto, I had a sore throat. And I'm sure I'm not alone. Some of you are probably excited about the truth of this story. But how do we keep it? How do we wake up tomorrow and go, yes? The Apostle Paul reminds us of something very significant in Romans chapter 8, which has become my favorite chapter of the Bible. If the Spirit of Him who raised Jesus from the dead is living in you, think about that. The Spirit who raised Jesus is living in you against all odds. He who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies through His Spirit who lives in you. Through the presence and power of the Holy Spirit, Easter can happen for you not only for an hour while you're celebrating in church, but it can happen in your life. Because God promises resurrection for everything that looks lifeless, hopeless, and dead. I invite you to ask the Holy Spirit to make that real for you, not just today, but every single day of your life. Christ is risen.